Hello, photographers. Welcome to this photographic video where we're going to be talking photographic techniques in a very specific area today. Because as much as we love talking the business stuff here on the Online Vault, and we really do, we also love talking about photographic techniques, and we're excited about what we're covering today. Lens selection for best sales. I'm Todd Lewis here at Charles Lewis Photography, and I'm going to bring you in to see behind the scenes here. I'm in my studio here in the TV studio, if you will. This is where the magic happens, showing you a little bit behind the scenes, but then I can show you what it looks like when you're looking at me through the good camera. And this is what it looks like here. There we go. That's what it really should look like. But really excited to be here today and to be joined by these two fantastic gentlemen. First off, from Brewer, Maine, we've got Tom Morelli. Hello, Tom.
You know, you talk about the lens for great sales. Today, we're going to tell you information. You don't have to sell the lens. You actually use the lens to make great sales.
Right on.
Fantastic. And also joining us, of course, my father, who I've been a business partner with for more years than I would like to admit. 37, I think now. My goodness. Yeah. Charles Lewis. Hi, Dad.
Hello, Todd. Hello, Tom. And hello, members. Glad to be here today. Great information here on lenses today.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking photographic techniques and specifically lens selection. Now, this is one thing we don't find people talking about quite as much as I think they should be in the photographic world. The choice of lenses, there's so many things that go into this. And we got to start off by talking about why is lens selection so important in the first place? Why is it such an important thing? Because obviously, you know equipment and the lens. I mean, there are a lot of photographers out there that will invest more in a lens for their camera than they did for the camera itself. That is not an uncommon thing. We know how important the glass is that we're using to create these images. But there are so many key points that go into the choice of a lens. So, Tom, I want to turn it over to you for a moment. And then, Dad, if you have anything you want to add to it about why lens selection is so important in what we do.
Yeah, great. It's a great question because we have to learn, particularly in today's digital age where our consumers, our prospects, our clients have great camera phones, let alone their own photography equipment. We need to create images that are better than what they can create at home. And part of that is knowing how to pose and light and do all the other things properly. But part of that is having the look or the style of the photograph be something more interesting, something more flattering than they know how to produce at home. And a lot of that comes from lens selection.
Yeah, Dad, what's your feeling been on that? Yeah,
and for me, the most important thing about the lens is I want to isolate the subject from the background if I possibly can. I want to throw the background sentimentally out of focus. I want to draw attention right to the person's personality and mask of her face. Very crucial things that lenses can really help us with. Plus, I don't ever want to have anything that is out of focus first, but also when there's something that's closer to the camera where it looks bigger, like here, my hand looks enormous. We don't want anything like that to happen. So the longer the lens, in my opinion, the better.
Hey there, I'm breaking into this video really quickly here to mention something that I'm doing this coming Thursday live, and it's completely free. Now, there's one major question that I'm getting asked nearly every day from photographers all over the country and all over the world. And that question is, where are the high-end photography clients and how do I get them to hire me right now in the summer of 2022? Now, have you felt worried or frustrated that you're not getting enough clients in front of your camera on a regular basis to bring in the profits you want and need? And whether you don't have any clients contacting you right now, or if you simply don't have as many as you would like, this Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm presenting a live program that's going to help with that. It's designed to do the two most important things that I can do for you right now. Number one, help you find the clients that are out there, and yes, they are actually out there, who really value what you do as a professional photographer. And then two, get them to choose and hire you as their photographer right now. No having to think about it, no coming back in a few months, none of that. Because we need to have them choose and hire you now. We know that if they don't hire you now and choose you now, the chances that they're going to come back later are almost zero. And that's why I put together this live online event. And yes, it's actually live. And it's called Where Are the Photography Clients Right Now, and How Will You Get Them to Hire You? I'm presenting this 1-hour program completely free, one time only, this Thursday, July 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, to save your spot for that right now, simply go to the link below and enter your name and primary email address, and you're all set. And don't worry, I'm going to protect your information. I won't share it or sell it to anyone for any reason. Then you'll get a confirmation email with the unique and personal link for you to join me and hundreds of other photographers on Thursday for this live event. Now, don't miss this program, as it's not being recorded or rebroadcast. I look forward to seeing you there. Now, let's get back to the video. Absolutely. So that's why lens selection is so important. And so let's dive right into all of the key points that go into how to choose these, you know. And the first question we have to deal with, obviously, is there a such thing as a best lens? You know, is there a best lens for, you know, any situation? It's like now we may have a go-to lens, okay, the one that we might use the most frequently. But Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you. Is there such thing as a best lens?
This is one of those things, if you ask the chef what's the best pan to cook with, you'll get 10 different answers. But for me, it might be different than you if you're photographing weddings or families or babies or children, and we're going to show some examples of that. For me, a zoom lens that has a range of like 28 to 105 is where I started, so that I could capture both weddings and families and babies and head and shoulders portraits within that range. Some people totally disagree with that, but for me, those are my go-tos. I have 2 or 3 actually backups of that I've used over the years. Some people, as we'll talk about, like other choices and for other things. So it's a bit up to the taste of the artist that you are, but we're also looking that time is money, and we want to do a great job for people, and we have to be consistent. So we need to find lenses we can count on that's sort of the workhorse of the studio. And for me right now, that 28 to 105 is kind of the big one, at least in my photography studio and inside clients' homes.
Right. Now, Dad, what about you? Was there a best lens for you, like your go-to?
No, not really. A little bit longer than normal focal length is kind of where I start. That I don't think I can remember, and this is where Tom and I differ a little bit. I can't remember hardly ever using a normal focal length. I'm always going for longer, but not too long, because that limits depth of field, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But just a little bit longer than normal, so that there's a beautiful, it just pulls things and gives things a beautiful setting.
All right, nice. All right, Tom, let's talk about this here. Proper exposure. So go ahead and talk about what we're seeing here. And then, Dad, there's a naughty word in here. And I want to wait, and I want to give our members an opportunity to pick out what that naughty word is. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But, Tom, go ahead and talk about this graphic here.
First of all, I know what the word is. My eye goes right to it. But you know, in the exposure triangle, one is the f-stop, the aperture, the opening in your lens, and which one you're using will definitely determine the look of the photograph. There's other factors as well, but aperture is one of the major ones. No matter what focal length you're using, that's going to change whether your background is beautifully soft and out of focus, and isolating your subject, which is normally what we're looking for. But in some cases, if you're photographing something else where you require everything to be in focus, those smaller apertures down on the 32, 22, 16 end will help achieve that. So that's the first place where you can make a choice when creating a portrait.
Yeah, that's so important, is being, you know, conscious of, again, all the different aspects of why a lens, you know, how that factors into what the image looks like and how it feels. That's what this really is about. It's really got to first and foremost be about, what do these images feel like? What's the emotion you're trying to get through? Which is part of why my dad likes those longer lenses too, but throwing the background. It's not about the background, it's about the foreground, it's about the people, the emotion, the connections in there. Now, the naughty word that is here. Dad, what is the naughty word here?
I'm sorry, but I can't say that word.
You can't say it. So you know what? I'm just going to block it right out here so we don't even see that anymore.
Thank you.
Talk about that, Dad, why it's important. 30 seconds.
Yeah. How you refer to your craft is extremely important to positioning yourself in the marketplace where people will see that you create valuable images. And so there's a whole series of words, and you can go onto the online vault and type in the word vocabulary, and it'll pull it right up where it gives you all the bad words and then all of the preference words that you use instead. It's very important.
Absolutely is, for sure. All right, Tom, turning it over to you to talk about this next key point here.
Yeah, in anticipation of a program such as this, because we do so many wide and varied subjects, this is a high school senior who brought his truck, obviously. So I tend to use the 200 millimeter lens a lot because I love the background. And with a couple of my cameras, that actually turns into like a 280 because of magnification factor. We'll talk about that later. Versus a 24 millimeter wide angle, and it shows you, unless you're going for a funny or an unusual effect, which you normally would not be, it definitely changes the look of the photograph, the style of the photograph. It's amazing the difference between the two, and part of that's perspective. You know, if you're coming in really close to somebody's nose with the camera only a few feet away, as Chuck had mentioned, it's perspective. His nose and his arms are the closest thing, and he is, and the truck is a little further away. So really, if I stood way back, a wide-angle lens doesn't do that much distorting in the middle. It's just when you get in close like that. So avoid those, even with family groups. Heaven help the person on the end of the family groups when you use a wide-angle lens, because it can really distort them, and they won't like you.
Yeah, and the thing here that I noticed that really, just again, the why. Always be asking yourself, what am I trying to get across in this image? And the lens is going to play into that. Is when I look at these two images, the one on the left is about him. The one on the right is about the truck. You know, I mean, yes, he's at the foreground, but just with that distortion and everything, it's kind of pulling me away from being focused on him, and it's focused more on the truck. So why are you creating this image? And that's what you have to ask yourself. And if you're doing the image to showcase the truck, obviously I'd probably put the truck a little more in the foreground, and him a little bit behind it, maybe, or next to it. So, but you can see what we're talking about here. It really changes the perspective, and that's where the focal length becomes so important. And again, why, Dad, if you want to add for 30 seconds or so, it capitalize on what you were talking about before. You may have even, he obviously wanted this photograph taken with his truck, so you want to show some of the truck. So this one you might not go with a, much longer lens, and go zoomed right in on his face where you don't even see the truck, right?
Yeah, you do, and Tom does the same thing. We do several different images with different perspectives, and so you can kind of do both so they can pick whichever is most important. But the priority for us has always been, I want something that Mom and Dad are going to love so much that they are going to invest in a significant wall portrait to put on their wall as home decor in their home. Yep. And so that's what I want, a feeling. And the longer lens is just, we see less of the truck, and yet you feel more about the truck. Right. With that close-up. It's just, so I like longer lenses.
And I will add, too, sorry to interrupt, Chuck, there were several pullbacks. Like, we did full lengths of him with that 200 millimeter lens, but the background fell nice and soft. So right, it was him and the truck sort of went out, and then just you can work around that, but those longer focal lengths are invaluable.
Yeah. All right, Tom, talk about what you wanted us to show here. And again, our eagle-eyed longtime members should see a naughty word on this graphic here that Tom did not create, right? I'm guessing, Tom?
This is actually, I believe Nikon did this. I just like I don't own that many lenses, but I like that big pile of lenses there. There's only about $100,000 worth of lenses there, but I thought I'd see what the industry folks said, and this is kind of what the Nikon folks recommended for their usage and what they thought their a useful range was, depending on what the subject matter. With us, with portraits, we kind of can narrow that down into that area that's the longer focal length. So you're not going to be generally using those 8mm, 16, 24, 35. You might go down to the 50 is only recommended by them because if someone's trying to get into the business really inexpensively, that lens sort of does a little of this. I don't recommend it, but that's why that got stuck in there. But yes, the word shot is not good.
It's not good. Never use the word shot. But this kind of gives you an idea, again, of just kind of what these different lenses do, the different ranges, and kind of what they're ideally utilized for. And you're seeing those examples wonderfully here in the images. So now we're going to break these down. We're going to show some images. Tom, I'm just going to kind of let you talk about each of these. Dad, feel free to chime in if you like. Go ahead, Tom. Okay, I'm cutting in on myself again here real quick to add a couple of things about this free live online event coming up this Thursday. Now, you might wonder who should attend this program and who shouldn't attend it. Well, let me ask you a few questions here. Number one, do you want more clients? And do you want them coming in consistently, regardless of the local competition or economy? Question number two, do you want more profits? And do you want the money coming in quickly without months of work to get there? Number three, do you want to work less hours and have more free time? Potentially time that you can use to take trips, enjoy life, spend time with family and friends, and not feel worried about where the money is going to be coming from? Now, if you answered yes to any of those questions, then you should join me for this live event coming up here. And remember, it's completely free. Now, who should not attend this event? Frankly, any photographer who's looking to be high volume, very low price. This event is about bringing in high ticket clients. So if your goal is to be a quote unquote point and click photographer, then this event is not for you. Now, also, please do not attend if you're looking for slick or dishonest tricks or manipulations to bring in clients. Now, I don't believe in any of that, and I won't teach that sort of thing, not on this event, not ever. So just a quick reminder, click that link below now and save your spot for this event. It will only take about 20 seconds, and then be sure to put Thursday, July 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, adjust for your time zone if needed, Eastern Time, on your calendar so you don't miss it. Okay, back to the video.
Yeah, now I do some very little, but sometimes a band or a group will come in that wants photography that's kind of different or unique. Sometimes they we like that wide angle thing from above. Well, that's with an 8mm lens, or, every couple years I'll get somebody that has a request and they'll say, can you do this? And I will, but that's more of a commercial application. You would never use this on a family group or any individuals. Then this is a wedding I did last year. I do them on a limited basis, but working inside the parents' home, the bride's getting ready with her bridesmaids, and also the lens flare photograph where they were out on a little dock, and I really wanted to have more sky involved and so forth because I was fairly close to them. So this is where wide-angle lenses can get useful, but the girls there, I cropped out a lot of that because the edges, there were no more people there. But if you get in too close with a wide angle lens, again, you're going to have a problem with distortion. You don't want to be unflattering to folks. But so if you are doing events like weddings, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, that can be a useful lens, but not normally for portrait photography.
And I want to chime in here a second too. In cinematography, I've heard from a number of cinematographers, and I tend to agree with this, that somewhere between typically a 35mm and a 50mm lens is kind of the closest to mimicking what the human eye sees, right.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to go for something that's really connecting on like a personal level where you want the viewer to kind of feel almost like they're there witnessing it in that moment, sometimes you can keep that in mind, again, from a psychological standpoint of a reason to use a 35mm or maybe even sometimes a 50mm like we're seeing here. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, and again, where I had a little more room to work, I used the 50 at that same wedding, and the same thing with this family group is I was back far enough, and in this case, this location was a place that was meaningful to them. The trees, the child grew up playing around there, so I wanted to. It's more pictorial or illustrative as far as we're not trying to throw the background out of focus on that one. So I used the 50 on that as a specific choice. Although with family groups, again, we try to go a little longer, soften that background, be more flattering to them in the photograph.
Yeah, Dad, very, very quickly, how often, I'm guessing you probably didn't even use a 50mm all that often, did you? No,
I don't. It's just, I understand the reason that Tom did this, and I agree with it completely. But maybe I'm too much, but I'm very much into going after very warm, fuzzy feeling and softening the background. But in this particular image of that family, I agree with his decision because it was a location that meant something to them.
Absolutely. And see, as we go forward, you're going to start to see the difference as we get into the longer lenses now, and you're going to see that shallower depth of field coming into play. Now, obviously here, Tom, the one with the car there, that 50mm lens makes an absolutely wonderful choice because you've got the car still in focus. I'm assuming that you wanted to show the car almost as part of their family. Is that correct?
Yeah, in some cases, I think the young man there would have preferred we just photographed the car. He got dragged kicking and screaming. He loves his wife, and his family are those two dogs. There's enough distance behind them, the trees that are in the background in the print, because they got a wall 2430. The wall print, the background does softly go out of focus because I used a little wider aperture. I was able to do that. Same thing with the folks there. Even though the yellow tree looks sharp in the wall portrait, it's a little bit soft. So I was able to use a bit of aperture with that to get that to at least fall a little bit more softly out of focus.
Very nice. Now we're bumping up a little bit more. We're getting to a 65 millimeter lens. Obviously, in this photograph, depth of field really isn't a factor. It's,
right.
So why did you choose a 65 millimeter lens for this cute image? That's just so beautiful.
Right. Well, most of my lenses are zooms, and this is a 28 to 105 that I use for my baby plan almost exclusively because we're working in usually rather limited quarters. I'm probably 3 feet, 2 or 3 feet above this child. So from there, as I'm zooming in and out on the face, and then sometimes it's the hands, the feet, I zoom back. It's much more feasible than trying to use fixed focal length lenses where I'm switching lenses and the baby's doing great things and I'm working with my camera. Instead, I'm totally focused on, with the zoom lens, every aspect of the baby's expressions, which is what counts. So I'm kind of hovering above the baby, and I zoom in, and I just looked at the metadata on the photograph and said, yep, that's about a 65. I took that at because it will record that. It tells you that in the behind the scenes. So that's probably an average between 65 and 80 in my studio. For babies.
All right, next up, 80 millimeter. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, and again, this is in that zoom range I referenced in my photography studio camera room. 80 millimeters for baby plans, zooming in and out. That seems to be a good average that happens to work. Not a lot of compression, but a little bit. But with babies, we're not so much worried. Just we don't get in close with wide-angle lenses, and we're okay. The 3/4 length outside with the high school senior, I was able to throw the background a little out of focus by a wider open aperture at 80 millimeter at that point, and then as I zoom in and out of the range, we can change that. Again, studio with high school seniors, same girl, by the way, great model for me. She was in the studio at first, and this 85 range, 85 to 105, sometimes a little longer than that, throwing the background softly out of focus and not being right in the subject's face.
Nice. Excellent. All right, let's take a look now at, now we're getting into the longer lenses. Now we're at the 150 millimeter. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, and again, this is a zoom. This is on my Sony camera, and this is a 55 to 200 zoom. And so usually that 105 to 200 area works great with children running around outside. This little guy wasn't going to pose very long, but I'm able to follow him, and the zoom allowed me to do that because I can move in and out as he moves. But that longer, you can see, and that's not generated artificially by Photoshop, which they let you do nowadays. That is an actual, the bokeh as it appeared right behind him with that lens. I think it's a 3.5 lens. It's not a real wide aperture, but it throws the background out of focus easily at that focal length.
Yeah, so beautiful. And one of the things that I want to make sure to bring up here, and maybe you guys, again, we got to watch the time, but I think this is important. A lot of photographers might think, yeah, I could just fix that. I could just photograph it with a shorter lens, and then I could just do the bokeh in Photoshop, and that way I have flexibility over it. But then what that does is it is changing what it does to the face as well. It's not just about shallow depth of field for throwing things sentimentally soft in the background. There are other factors there, right, Tom and Dad?
Yeah, exactly. I'll just say I've tried it. When all this AI stuff comes out, and you can try those filters that throw the background in focus, sometimes can look realistic. To me, it still looked pretty artificial, and it doesn't get the edges. And why not just take it in the first place and do it organically, so to speak, and not have to goof in Photoshop with it?
We've grown accustomed to noticing when things don't look right. There's just something not right. If you were to photograph, again, going back to this image here, if you were to photograph this person here with maybe a 35 millimeter lens, and then you threw the background out of focus there. People might pick up on that. There's just something that doesn't feel right about this, because that difference between the 35 millimeter and the 150 millimeter lens may change a little bit of the perspective of, how close his nose is in conjunction with his shoulder, and things like that. So those things are factors. Granted, they're small factors, but they can be factors. And I thought that was something kind of important to bring up there. All right, 200 millimeter lens. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, this is kind of my go-to outside with high school seniors and families. And in most successful portraits, I find that a foreground, midground, and background are important to give you depth and draw you into the photograph, make it feel three-dimensional. And part of that is a soft foreground and a soft background. So the depth of field here is shallow enough that we can have just this high school senior be in focus and the rest be out of focus, which kind of makes your eye has to go look at the subject's face and the expression. And this ended up as a wall portrait. This is one of a series of high school seniors from this family. One more coming up in August. He's the youngest and the last one. Shucks. But anyway, out of the four of them. But that lens is almost always on 200 when I'm working outside.
Yeah,
right.
That's a beautiful, beautiful image, Tom. I really like it. The softness, the feeling of it. I really like it.
Thanks.
Yeah, very nice. All right, let's get into our next section here, depth of field and f-stop. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, and if you've been in photography long enough, you start to see the relationship between the aperture of the lens and how much is in focus in front and back of your subject. And of course, the smaller apertures, and it's reverse. If you're new to this, you think a smaller aperture is the number. Actually, it's the opening I'm referring to. It's like the iris of your eye. So the smaller that, the depth of field increases, and the wider open it is, the more you head toward the maximum aperture of the lens, the less is in focus. So we tend to work, if possible, for this purpose, down with those wider, more open apertures. Now, this also shows that how the focal length of the lens can definitely affect depth of field. It's hard if you have a really wide-angle lens to get shallow depth of field, because optically they don't work that way. But a longer lens, which is another great reason to use one, besides the compression effect, you can see that 200 millimeter, that dark green area, the depth of field is very shallow, and that's a good thing in most of the cases that we're trying to work with people we're photographing. So those wider open apertures, those wider open f-stops combined with longer lenses are going to give you that effect much more realistically.
Yeah, and one of the things I like to think about, as a cinematographer who also happens to have worked with a still photographer for 30 plus years, I like to think of it as the short lenses are for the environment. The medium lenses are for the relationships, and the long lenses are for the individual. Right. Now, that's not always the case, okay? Of course not. There are always exceptions to the rule, but that's the way I like to think of them. If I'm trying to capture the people and their relationship to the environment, I'm going to use the shorter lenses. If I'm looking to capture the relationships between the people, multiple people, I'm going to use those kind of medium to slightly longer lenses. And then those long lenses are really valuable when you want those beautiful close-ups or those beautiful compression of the images and so forth. So that's kind of the way I look at it from a cinematography standpoint. But I think that can also apply a lot of the time to, when you're doing a graduating senior and they really want the environment to be a part of that image as well as them, you might go to some of those shorter lenses. All right, Tom, let's talk about what we're seeing here.
All right, and these folks were engaged. Well, I did their wedding, did several things. They have 2 children sent, so they were part of my baby plan. But this was one of their first child maternity portrait. They wanted me to come out and photograph them with their horses. They have a beautiful multi-acre farm not too far from here. And they wanted to show the environment, but I wanted to throw it a little soft, romantic, out of focus. So I was using probably an 85-ish, can't remember exactly, 85 to 100, stood back a little bit away so that we had some compression, and we also had some of that background go softly out of focus. That's I don't work outside very often, anything less than 100 to 105 and plus. Same thing here. This is probably close to the 200 millimeter, throwing this background out of focus in a field and the foreground out a little bit with a little vignetting. And that definitely is something that people can't do at home right now. They may accidentally do it if they have a long lens and a camera, but they don't really think about that, and so that's why they see that work and they'll give me a call. So those long lenses are definitely, as we always say, don't rush out and buy a bunch of new lenses because that's not going to matter. You can get all these things used, gently loved, guaranteed for a lot less on eBay. So don't think that this is going to make or break your business if you buy a new one, because that's not really what we're recommending here. But what I am recommending is how they look. So, and again, a little longer lens. These are all in the 150 to 200 range. I do have a Nikon that goes up to 300 millimeter. It gets a little tight in some situations as far as how far back I have to get. So usually 200 is where I'm at on situations like this with high school seniors. Little girl with the eyes there, it might have been a little longer lens. In my studio, when we're doing head and shoulders portraits, executive portraits, that's in that 105 range. It throws the background just a little out of focus because we're far enough away from it. And the young girl there, that was taken with a 200 millimeter. It was freezing that day. I'll never forget it. That was one of my high school senior representatives, but obviously she was a sweetie, and we hurried and got in. You ever do those sessions where you come in and your hands are frozen? That was one of them. And but longer lens, wanted to throw that background softly out of focus.
Now let's talk about the next thing here, comfort of subject and distance. Now this, has to factor in because we always should be concerned about the comfort of our client first and foremost. So Tom, how does comfort of the client factor in when you're choosing a lens?
Yeah, you really want to avoid, if you can, being right in someone's face or their personal space, their comfort zone. And so the longer your focal length, the longer your lens, the more you can back up a bit and they feel like, okay, they're not breathing down my neck here. I'm able to work with this person and have them feel more comfortable. Now, the closest I ever get is with babies. I'm still 3-4 feet apart as they're on the prop or on the pillow. That's why I have a slightly wider lens so that I can fit them in the studio. But other than that, and babies need to see my face, so I get expressions. So I'm right next to the camera getting those expressions. But when you're working with any other group, whether it's a family or a high school senior or children outside, particularly, if you back off a bit, that just gives them a little space. They just feel more comfortable that way, I've found.
All right, nice. Now let's move into talking about zoom lenses versus prime lenses. Now, this is a subject that can be a sore spot. This is a massive subject in the cinematography world.
Yeah.
I assume it's probably just as big for photographers. When do you choose having a zoom lens for that immediate flexibility where you don't have to change a lens to get exactly the look you want versus having the, oftentimes better light coming through, more light coming through of the prime lens, Tom?
Yeah, and if you want to start an argument in a bar, this is a good one. It's like PC versus Mac. But here's my take on it, because I own both types of lenses. Generally, the prime or fixed focal length lenses have bigger glass in the front, so they have more light capturing capability. So they're great for low light inside a church, or if somebody's doing a lot of lower light photography. Also, they have a wider aperture capability, so you get more bokeh, throw the background more out of focus. That's a great feature. However, depending on the subject, the zoom lenses may not have the maximum aperture or as big a glass, at least at that price point, but you're able to zoom in and out without having to run back and forth to your subject. So it depends on what you're photographing. So for me, weddings, always the zooms seem to work really well. There are occasions where I have a portrait and I will use a fixed focal length lens, but it's a little more rare. So you have to decide what you're photographing. For the money, you could buy literally 2 zoom lenses that cover almost every range that you'd ever need in your business, like a 24 to 105 and a 100 to 200 or 250 or 300. Those 2 would cover the range. But you'd have to be a little more judicious, a little more careful how you use them to get that bokeh, but it can be done, and I do it all the time.
Yeah, and also can come down to changing your ISO as well. Right. With cameras getting as good as they are getting with low noise and so forth. Right. Then you can use those zoom lenses more often, and certainly from a flexibility and quickness standpoint, and staying connected to the client. Right. To the subject, very powerful. All right, let's talk about this here. FX versus DX and sensor size.
Yeah, well, DX is the smaller sensor. It's just they're a little less expensive cameras. They're made on almost a Sony and Canon and Nikon, and they were known more in the consumer class, although I own a couple, and if you're careful, they produce a beautiful, gorgeous image. So if you have a camera that's DX or the smaller sensor size, don't throw it in the trash. Mail it to me, Tom Morelli. And but FX is the larger format. Canon and Nikon. Nikon really has this nomenclature. The other camera companies have different words for it, but FX is a full frame versus the DX being smaller frame. The only reason that really matters when it comes to lenses is some lenses are made specifically for DX cameras. And FX cameras have other lenses, but you can co-use. It just will change the look of the cropping or change the coverage area on that sensor. So, if you're using a cropped sensor camera and you put a regular lens on an FX lens, you just will have a magnification factor. And that sometimes is actually a good thing. So quality-wise, if you're careful with your technique, you won't see a whole lot of difference. It's just that obviously the bigger frame, you're going to get more pixels, or sometimes some people feel like it's a little more clear. If it's done properly, you're not going to notice the difference. Don't throw away your DX camera and go, well, I got to go get an FX camera right now. Wait until you're making an income that justifies that for sure.
Yeah. All right. Nice. So, Tom, let's talk a little bit here about our next subject, why tripods can become very important in our lens usage as well. Let's talk about telephoto lenses and vibration.
Boy, I learned this from Charles Lewis, and I also learned it from the School of Hard Knocks when people used to order portraits for the wall, and by the time they were printed in the adequate size, they were soft, camera motion, blur, whatever you want to call it. And it was because the lens is a heavier, longer lenses are a little heavier, so they have a little different balance. And using a tripod ensures that the camera and you aren't going to move the camera during the exposure, so that they are as sharp as they can be. If we want to soften an image, great, you can do it with a filter in Photoshop, but let's have good camera technique so that it is as in focus as it can be. And a tripod will help prevent, well, it all has several uses. It helps interacting with your subject as well, but it will have several uses, including keeping the camera still, so that during that particular image is being created, you're not having that bit of blur or shake, because that's really going to show up. And I don't care if there's aftermarket products. A lot of people say, well, I got a focus, plug into Photoshop that'll fix that. No, get it right in the camera the first time, because nothing will substitute for a good, clear, in-focus photograph.
Right on.
For sure.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of different grades of, when we say glass quality, that means the elements that are within the lens and to what, how they're ground, some are molded, some are ground. There's all kinds of different varieties and styles and sharpness and so forth. And some have more exacting standards. For me personally, in the portrait realm, yes, I want the best I can get, but there's no reason to go and invest $7,000 in a lens when a $1,000 or less lens will do the same thing. So in the old days, there were some really inferior lenses being crafted, and now the market has kind of righted itself. It's hard to buy bad glass, so to speak. It's just that when you invest in it, the clarity of the photograph. Some of the Sony makes what's called G Master. Canon has the L series. There's different series that are higher end, better glass. If you did a side-by-side, you may or may not be able to see the quality step up. But for now, don't go necessarily investing in what you think is the most expensive lens. Again, unless your income justifies it, then go for it. But you have other things, maybe vacations or things like that you want to go on first. So, but part of it is lens flare, and part of it is also the coating within lenses. A lot of elements go into what makes a lens more expensive. The maximum aperture, the wider that glass is in the front, the more it's going to cost, because it's physically wider and made that way. So, but just so you know the difference, you don't have to start out with the best glass.
All right, let's talk about lens hoods and accessories.
Yeah, as this illustration shows, the light that you want in your image is that coming from your subject, straight in through the lens. If the sun or other light emitting things like the sun or to the side, it can bounce off that and degrade the image. And a lens hood will protect the front element of the lens from getting anything else. It's like when Todd makes movies. They have a box on the front of the movie camera or on the front of the image maker, whatever it is, whether it's a camera or a film camera in the old days, that keeps that light from coming in and degrading the image.
Which I have to admit, Tom, it's one of the first things I removed from the camera. I'm a big fan of lens flare. I love how alive it can make a moving image feel, but in still images it can be distracting.
Right.
Because we want that moment to be focused on that subject, the eyes, the connections, the emotions. But in a film it can make it feel so much more alive, and that's one of the fascinating differences that I love between still photography and cinematography.
And in cinematography, you're trying to emulate that we're there watching it. So if we turned our head and the sun is there, a flare in our eyes, that's real. That's what makes the film look real. But in a case of a still photograph, you can add them artificially or you can do it intentionally. But if you use a lens hood, generally it will help you to eliminate that unless you want it. The other thing, of course, on a more side note, is it does protect the front element of the lens. If you bump into something, if there's sand blowing by, if there's things going on that might damage the front element of the lens hood can help protect that as well. Which leads us to the next little accessory here, which is filters. Now, with the advent of Photoshop and digital imaging, a lot of the filters that we used to put on our lenses, we don't need anymore because we can do that post-production as long as we have a good exposure in the first place. However, UV stands for ultraviolet lens, doesn't really affect the look of the photograph, but it is clear glass, optically made, so it doesn't degrade your image, but it is there to protect the front element of your lens. It's a lot easier to replace a $20, $30, $40, $50 UV filter that got cracked or sand in it and scratched than it is the front element of a lens. So a lens hood and a UV filter are just sort of little safety features. They won't change the look of your photography, really. It's just really designed there to make sure you protect the equipment that you're using.
Fantastic. Great point. All right. So some final thoughts here about what we talked about today. Being a professional photographer and business owner means finding a balance between being a great artist and a great business person. You've got to find that balance. That's what's so key, all right? Lens choice, as with everything else in our business, is based on emotion, first and foremost. That's such an important thing. We tend to think of, well, what's going to make the best image? Think of what's going to make the best emotion. That's what we're selling here as portrait and wedding photographers. And it's not about spending lots of money. Okay, the truth is, you can find a couple of lenses you really love and just use them, right? Especially if they're zoom lenses that have that kind of flexibility there. So great points, great stuff today. So I want to leave you with those final thoughts. Absolutely. Now, Tom, I want to go back to you here. Any last minute thoughts that you have about the importance of lens selection?
Well, Todd just hit upon it as far as you can find lots of ranges and you can go and find them used for relatively inexpensive, and they will earn you a great living if you do all the other things that we talk about, from your marketing to emotions to everything else that goes into it. The lens is important, but it's not what's going to make or break your business. So it's a tool. I know I like to fall in love with the equipment, but it's a tool. So, get what you need, get by with that. And then if you're making tons of money, good, you want to buy something fancy for yourself, go ahead.
All right, nice. And Dad, anything that you want to add about lens selection and how crucial it's been in your photography business?
Yeah, I'm less concerned about the glass, except for a family portrait. That it's important to me. Full-length family portraits being made into a beautiful wall portrait, 30 by 40 or something. But everything else, the lenses are too sharp. Today's lenses are just plain too sharp for fine, warm, fuzzy portrait work and wedding photography. So I'm very much into used equipment because you can save so much money. Never buy something new. You don't need to do that. It's not necessary.
Right. Nice. Excellent. All right. Well, with that, thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this program, getting to talk about photographic stuff. I know we were moving pretty fast, but we got a lot of really great points out throughout this program today. I want to thank Tom and my dad for being here. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It was great having you both here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. Take care, everyone. Remember, visit the Online Vault regularly. Watch for the new programs that are coming up on the Online Vault each and every month. And we'll talk to you again on the next program. I hope you enjoyed this video program today. It was an honor to bring it to you. Now, before you head back to everyday life, if you haven't done so already, be sure to save your spot for this free 1-hour online event coming up this Thursday. Now, I have one goal with this event: to give you at least 3 major action items that you can implement right away to increase your profits right now, period. That's my goal, and I know I can and will achieve it. I look forward to having you join me and the other photographers who will be on with us. Have a great week. Until then, take care. Click that link below. See you soon.